Margaret Hollis and just had been eating alone for 11 minutes when the woman walked in. She noticed her the way you notice someone who carries themselves a certain way. Unhurried, back straight, a small rolling carry-on in one hand and a paperback tucked under her arm. The woman was black, late 50s, dressed in a neat charcoal blazer over a white blouse, the kind of clothes that said she'd been traveling for hours and still looked composed. She gave her name to the young server near the door, Priya. Her name tag read, and Priya checked something on her stand and smiled and said, "Right this way," and led her to table 4. Table 4 was the good one, by the window. Huh? The afternoon light came through at a long angle and lay across the white tablecloth like something painted. Margaret had wanted that table herself when she'd been seated 45 minutes ago, but the dining room had been filling. And she'd taken the two top near the center without complaint, the way she had taken most things in her life. Practically, without a fuss. She watched the woman settle into the chair by the window and set her carry-on neatly beside her and open her menu, and she thought, good for her. Margaret went back to her soup. She was 3 spoonfuls in when she heard the man's voice, not raised, not rude, but carrying the particular flatness of someone who has decided the conversation is already over. "Ma'am, I apologize for the confusion. There's been a booking error with this table. I'm going to need to move you." Margaret looked up. The man standing at table 4 was white, mid-40s, in a dark suit with the hotel's small brass pin on his lapel. His name was on a badge she couldn't read from here. He had the posture of someone who managed things, who was at this moment managing this, and his hands were clasped in front of him in the particular way that people clasp their hands when they want to look helpful, but have already decided. The woman at the table looked up from her menu. Her face didn't change. "I have a reservation," she said. Her voice was quiet, and even the voice of a person who had spent decades speaking to rooms full of people who were not yet listening. "Odom, I confirmed it this morning, and I do apologize. There's been a system issue, and this table has been reassigned." He gestured toward the back of the room. "We have a lovely table available near the service door," she said. It was not a question. A small silence. "It's a perfectly comfortable. May I see the written reservation policy?" she said. "The one that explains how a confirmed booking can be reassigned without notice." Margaret set down her spoon. The manager, she could read his badge now, Ferris D., floor manager, paused, with his hands still clasped. "I understand your frustration," he said, which was not an answer. "I'm not frustrated," the woman said. "I'm curious about the policy." Ferris said something about a software system, about guest experience, about how he would personally ensure her comfort at the alternative table. He said it all in the smooth, low register of a man who had said this kind of thing before and had always been successful. His eyes did not quite meet hers. She did not move. Margaret watched her sit there. Menu closed now on the tablecloth, both hands resting on top of it, phone beside her hand with a reservation confirmation visible on the screen. And not move. Not 1 inch. She simply waited. As though she had all the time in the world. As though she were the still point. And Ferris were the thing circling her. And then Ferris turned toward the entrance. A couple had come in. White, mid-60s. The man in a sport coat, the woman in a light cardigan. Margaret had watched them arrive 2 minutes ago and stand at the host. Stand without a reservation. And she had watched Priya check the book and look uncertain. She watched now as Ferris walked to the entrance, said something brief and pleasant to the couple, and, without looking at table 4, picked up 2 menus and led them down the aisle. To table 4. To the woman's table. The woman at the window watched them sit down in front of her. She watched Priya appear with water glasses. She watched the man in the sport coat unfold his napkin, and the woman in the cardigan smile at the afternoon light. She stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a scene. She stood the way a person stands when they have decided that the ground beneath them is theirs. She picked up her phone, holding the confirmation screen outward, and she said, to no one in particular, and to everyone at once, "I have a confirmed reservation for this table. The dining room, about half full, 14 or 15 people." A quiet Thursday afternoon. Went very still. Margaret felt something move through her. She would not be able to name it precisely later when her daughter asked her about it on the phone that night. It wasn't anger exactly, though anger was in it. It was something more like recognition, a thing she had seen and half seen, and looked away from so many times in her 63 years, assembling itself at last into a shape she could not sit with. She looked down at her soup. She thought, "This is not your business," she thought. "You don't know what happened before you arrived," she thought. "You have a flight in 70 minutes, and a carry-on to wheel to the gate, and a daughter picking you up on the other end, and none of this is yours to carry." She thought all of those things in the space of about 4 seconds. Then she put her napkin on the table. She stood up. "Excuse me." Her own voice surprised her. It came out steadier than she expected. She was not a woman who spoke in dining rooms. She was a retired nurse from Dayton, Ohio, who ate her meals quietly and read her paperbacks and did not involve herself. Her daughters would have been startled and proud and maybe a little worried. Ferris turned. His expression was professionally pleasant and privately alarmed. "I was sitting right there," Margaret said, pointing at her table, "when this woman came in. She was seated at table 4 by your server. That was about 8 minutes ago." She turned slightly to include the room. "The couple who just sat down, I watched them arrive without a reservation, after her, and now they're at her table." A silence. "Ma'am, I understand, but the seating arrangements—" "I watched it happen," Margaret said. "I'm not asking you to explain the seating. I'm telling you what I saw." From the window table, not table 4, the other window table, a man and a woman in their 70s who had been eating a quiet anniversary lunch and who had gone still the moment Ferris first appeared. The man pushed back his chair. He didn't stand all the way up. He's just pushed back his chair and set his fork down, and that small gesture carried the weight of a verdict. His wife reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. And then she looked at Ferris and she said, "We've been coming here for 6 years." Priya had not moved from beside the service station at the wall. She was young, 22, 23, and she had the expression of someone who had been waiting to see which way the current was going to run. She looked at Margaret. She looked at Dr. Odom, standing at the window with her phone in her hand. She stepped away from the wall. "The reservation is in the system," Priya said. She said it to Ferris, but she said it loudly enough for the room. "Table 4, Odom. Confirmed this morning at 11:47. I checked it when she came in." Ferris was still. Something had shifted in the room and he could feel it. "I'll need to speak with the duty manager," he said, in the tone of a man relocating the conversation. "Yes," Margaret said. "You will." The duty manager was a woman in her 40s named Yardley. She appeared within 4 minutes, and whoever had called for her had clearly conveyed the nature of the situation, because she was walking at the pace of someone who already knew what she was going to find. She listened to Priya. She looked at the reservation log on the host stand. She looked at Dr. Odom's phone. She looked at the couple seated at table 4, who were by now very quiet and very still, and who had the particular stillness of people who have understood, in the last few minutes, that they are sitting inside someone else's wrong, and who would later tell their own story about this afternoon, in their own way. Yardley turned to Ferris and said, "I need you off the floor." She said it quietly, the way a person says something that doesn't need volume to carry weight. Ferris unclenched his hands. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who had not expected the ground to give way, and then he smoothed his jacket and walked toward the back hall and did not look at anyone as he went. Yardley apologized to the couple at table 4 and arranged for them to be seated at a table near the center that was, in fact, quite comfortable. She did it without drama and without unkindness, and they went. Then she turned to Dr. Odom. "Dr. Odom," she said, "table 4 is yours. I'm so sorry." She said the second sentence the way it deserved to be said, not as a corporate phrase, but as an actual statement from one person to another, an acknowledgement of what had happened and what it meant. Dr. Odom looked at the table. The afternoon light was still there, doing what it had been doing the whole time, indifferent and beautiful. She sat down. She set her phone on the tablecloth and her paperback beside it. She asked Priya for a glass of water and thanked her by name. Margaret was still standing beside her own table, with her napkin in her hand. "Please sit down and finish your lunch," Dr. Odom said to her. Her voice was still quiet, still level, but there was something different in it now. A kind of warmth that had not been there before, or perhaps that had been there all along and was only now visible. Margaret sat. The dining room reassembled itself around them, the low hum of conversation returning, someone across the room resuming a story they'd paused, the clink of a spoon. Normal life reconstituted, but not quite the same as it had been. The elderly man at the window table caught Margaret's eye and gave her a single small nod. She nodded back. Before Margaret left, She had a flight in 70 minutes and she asked for her check and tipped Priya generously and tucked her paperback into her bag. She stopped at table 4. Safe travels, she said. Dr. Odom looked up. Her meal had arrived, something with roasted vegetables, a glass of sparkling water, the white tablecloth and the afternoon light. She looked like a person exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you, she said. And then, what's your name? Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. It wasn't much, 2 words. But she said them in the way that people say things they mean entirely, without decoration, and Margaret felt them settle somewhere in her chest and stay there. She wheeled her carry-on out of the dining room and through the lobby and toward the gate. She thought about Priya stepping away from the wall. She thought about the elderly man pushing back his chair. She thought about what it cost and what it didn't cost, and what it meant that she'd waited 8 minutes before she stood up. And she thought about that last part for a long time. The hotel's general manager sent a written apology to Dr. Odom's room that evening, comped the meal and the afternoon's incidentals, and forwarded the matter to the Human Resources Department with a request for a formal review of the floor manager's conduct. Dale Ferris was placed on administrative leave the following morning pending that review. A new verification protocol, a logged, time-stamped confirmation required for any table reassignment, was laminated and posted at the host stand within the week. Priya received a commendation in writing from the hotel's director of guest services. Margaret landed in Dayton that night and called her daughter from the car and told her the whole story in the dark parking garage while her engine idled. And her daughter said, "Mom, in the particular way that means I am proud of you, and also I was worried, and also I love you." And Margaret said, I know. She thought about it for weeks afterward. Not about what she'd done, which hadn't felt like much, but about what the woman at table 4 had done. How she'd stood there in that dining room with her phone in her hand and her back straight and her voice level, asking a quiet question about a policy that everyone in the room knew had no answer. How she'd waited in plain sight and let the truth be plainly visible and trusted, or perhaps simply decided, that a room full of ordinary people would eventually see it. And they had. That was the thing Margaret kept coming back to, late at night and in the early mornings, for a long time after. They had.